People say to me, but you got to get the timing right for this. And I always then quote Martin Luther King, who said that it's always the right time to do the right thing. And so we just have to do what we have to do now. Because if we don't, our children and their children will be discussing the same thing in the years ahead. So if we can start doing this now, break down the barriers, earn the trust and respect of people who are different to us, and show them trust and respect in return, then maybe our children will be able to live in a different society, at least partially.
This is Let's Talk Courageous Communication with me, Telana Simpson, and today our guest, Ian Fuhr. South Africa today, and even in the world, we could say that we need a new breed of culture-driven leaders who will require specific skills to meet the complex demands of our volatile socio-political and economic landscape. This is a framework called cultureneering that has been developed by our guest today, Ian Fuhr. Ian is a serial entrepreneur and founder of the Hatch Institute and also the Sorbet Group. He's written a number of books, and today we are going to be talking about how and why to have more courageous conversations around racial healing. Welcome, Ian. It's really been looking forward to this conversation. And before we get into, I suppose, the meat of it, is just to ask you, tell us a bit about your story of how you came to be where you are today doing this valuable work.
Good. Thanks very much, Telana, and thanks for having me on the podcast today. That's a long story, Telana. 50 years, about 50 odd years, almost 50 years of being a serial entrepreneur, being in various businesses, starting from retail to the music industry to race relations consulting back in the 90s, and then back into retail, and then ultimately in 2004 started the Sorbet brand, and founded that, and then ran that for about 12 years, 13 years or so. And then after that, after I sold Sorbet and left, I started the Hatch Institute, which is a coaching and consulting business. And I think throughout the journey, the most important element of the journey was that I've always been fascinated by the people side of business. I've never been a great businessman in the true sense of the word. I'm not a financial guy. I very successfully dropped out of university when I was in my second year. So that wasn't my strength. And I've just been interested in people, leadership, and culture in particular. And together with culture comes race relations. So those are the things right from the early days, back in the day, back from 1976, when I started this stuff. I've always been interested in that. And so over the years, I developed what I call a culture framework. And that culture framework is called cultureneering. We've got a name for it, and I've written a book about cultureneering. And it's really just about how to build a strong culture in a diverse workforce that lays the platform for obsessive customer service. So a very strong link between culture and service, and if you can build a strong culture, you can deliver great service. But unfortunately, if you don't have a strong culture, it's highly unlikely that the service is going to be good, because people will be too focused on things and not enough on the customers. And that's been my story. So when I started Sorbet, it was really through that, because after I sold my retail business, I had this culture framework, and I was looking for a business to apply my culture framework. And I would never have chosen the beauty industry. I know very little at the time. I still don't know a hell of a lot about it, but I do know that if you build a strong culture, you can be successful. That culture allowed us to grow to 225 sorbet outlets, and over 3,500 people, etc., etc. So it worked very well for us, and as a result, I'm using that culture framework in all my coaching and consulting work, and that's how I am where I am now, basically, in a nutshell. Very quick summary of my nearly 50 years of work.
Of work, yes. And so it's culminated right now in your latest book, the cultureneering, as you call it. And that's where I wanted to maybe bring it to our topic for today. We wanted to talk a bit about how and why we should be talking more about race and race relations and diversity, and how to manage all that complexity.
Yeah.
So how does the cultureneering then relate to that topic? I know you mentioned it briefly, but maybe just if you'd like to go in more detail.
Into a bit more detail. Okay, so the whole idea of cultureneering, as I say, is to build a culture that will allow you to go out and deliver great service. But that means that you have to create for everybody in the organization a sense of belonging. So if you don't have a sense of belonging, then you can have a slightly toxic culture. And that sense of belonging comes from a number of different things that one has to do. It's involved in leadership, it's involved in the personal development of the leaders, and in particular, it involves the diversity of the culture. And then from there, we focus with a laser sharp focus on race. And the reason for that is I still believe, and having been involved with this topic and seeing it unfold over the years, is that race is still one of our, if not the biggest, one of the biggest challenges we face in South Africa. We have not been able to address the real issues behind race and the damage that it's caused over the years. And so we are still in limbo there and hoping that it'll go away by itself. But unfortunately, experience tells us that that will never happen. And so we have to address it. So it's one of those things where people are wanting to put it behind us now. I think there's a bit of race fatigue out there, always talking about race and why do we need to bring it up all the time, and why do we need to revisit our past? Can't we just let it go and move forward? But unfortunately, you can't do that. And because we do need to understand why we got into this mess in the first place. That's the key to it. And why we are so polarized as a nation. We are still very, very racially polarized. Despite whatever changes people think have happened over the years, there's a lot of that. And it's not only physical polarization, it's also psychological polarization. So we haven't yet addressed all of the damage that systemic racism has caused over the last 300 years now, effectively. And so until we do that, it's going to be very difficult to build something going forward, because there's always going to be these things that are lurking below the surface that are going to raise its ugly head from time to time. And so we do need to address it, and that's where the courageous conversations need to come into the picture, so that we can start to really talk about it and learn from each other and break down the divides that have polarized us so much, and start to reconnect as humans rather than as races.
Yeah, and it's such a touchy subject. What about it though leads us to keep shying away from it?
Because it's too sensitive. It's too sensitive, and people are really afraid of saying the wrong thing, doing the wrong thing. There's so much drama going on social media when somebody's out of line, that they are really afraid that they're going to end up, with 200,000 posts about what they've done wrong. And so they rather say nothing, or they just deflect it and pretend that it's not a problem. And this is where we get things like color blindness, and people are saying, I'm not a racist, I have a black friend, things like those kind of comments, which are really not helpful in the circumstances. And so they don't know what to do. They're highly sensitized, they're highly afraid that there's controversy around every bend. So most companies are a little bit nervous to get into it. So what they do generally is they do the diversity workshop, diversity and inclusion. And that really means diversity and inclusion is good work, nothing wrong with it. It will can only be helpful, but it really doesn't go deep enough. It looks just more at culture rather than at race and racism and the real issues that hover below the surface. And people are afraid to talk about this, so they go for the softer approach where they can't get into too much trouble, just talking about culture and practice and beliefs and things like that. So we go a little bit deeper, in fact, quite a lot deeper. And we've been doing this now for a while. We run these, what they call racial healing circles. And the racial healing circles are when we get a group of people of mixed race together and they talk about themselves and their stories and what it was like to grow up in South Africa. And that is really a very powerful learning tool. People, it's quite remarkable how little some people know about what really happened in this country. You would imagine that everybody would understand exactly what apartheid was, how they applied it, how brutal it was, but not at all. Particularly white people, as a generalization, don't know, and this is something that we've seen for ourselves. They really don't know how deep this thing was, how unfair it was, how unjust it was, and how brutal it was, and how it impacted on people's lives in such an enormously negative way. And as a result, of course, we have the most unequal society in the world. I don't think there's any country at the moment right now that's more unequal than South Africa. And that stems directly from our past. Sadly, the current government hasn't done much to rectify it after having a wonderful opportunity to do so. And so it's just really been exacerbated to a degree. And we haven't still actually dealt with the issues. There was in the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, they did address some of the racial issues, but that was targeted mainly at victims of violence and stuff like that. It wasn't really a place where people could heal, because that healing is essential. There's still people today that are very, very badly psychologically damaged as a result of this superiority, inferiority principle, which is what racism actually means. Racism is really sort of prejudice and discrimination based on an inherent belief that one group is superior to another and therefore deserves better treatment and a better lifestyle. So that whole thing now has sort of evolved into a lot of issues around psychological damage. One of them in particular is the imposter syndrome, which I find a lot when I'm coaching. I'm doing a lot of coaching of people, and particularly young black people, young black women, and people of color have this belief that they don't really deserve to be in the position that they are at. And that's often quite high level managers. And they're still not sure if they're there because of their ability and their competence, or if they're there because of black economic empowerment. And so you have this imposter syndrome, which comes from people being told for so many years that they're actually inferior, and therefore they must never expect to be able to compete at the same level as the superior group. And so all of that stuff, we might think it's gone, but I can tell you for sure it's not. It really is pervasive. And most white managers in organizations have no idea about this. No one's ever told them that there's a thing called imposter syndrome. and how it affects the people that are working for them. And so it's a challenging situation.
Yeah, it is, and it's very complex. And a part of it sounds like is, because I wanted to touch on the concept of unconscious bias. Because I find when I share that with people and we teach them the concept that you have biases that you're not even aware of, and that we all as humans have them, but when you become aware of them, you can actually then work with them and counteract them in some way. So maybe you can just share, because it sounds like, as you're saying, a lot of people don't know the effect of racism, and you said institution, was it structural racism and all of that,
Systemic,
and the effects, systemic, thank you, that's the word you use. So most people don't even understand the impact of that, because they don't have the awareness because of the biases that are affecting their cognitive abilities. So maybe just touch on that.
Okay, so I think we need to start there, from an early age, when people are born, and as soon as they can understand anything at all, they are being taught things. And this is where their paradigms are formed. It starts off structurally from the parents, and then into the home, into the social conditioning at schools, friendships, and all of that stuff. And then, of course, education and life experience. So we all have thousands and thousands of bits of information that sit in our minds, and I call that your book of rules. So your book of rules is the accumulation of all the paradigms, all the value systems, the beliefs, the biases, everything, the prejudices, all sitting up there and then dictating your behavior. So you'll respond differently depending on what your book of rules thinks or believes. So then within that book of rules, there are some conscious biases, which you're aware of and you know of. And then there's some unconscious ones which you're not aware of. And there are lots and lots of examples of unconscious bias where you behave in a certain way and you don't even realize why you behave that way. And even if you ask yourself, where did that come from? Why did I respond like that? And you're not sure. So it's really important that we try and unpack some of those things. I'll give you an example of what happened with me. So you would say, because of my work with race relations over the years, I would sort of consider myself an anti-racist. And so if anyone said to me that I still had racial biases, I wouldn't have been too happy about that. So, but nevertheless, one day, many years ago, I was sitting in an aeroplane waiting to take off from Joburg to Cape Town. And the pilot comes over from the speaker system and starts talking to us. And immediately, I could tell it was a black pilot. I'd never been flown by a black pilot in my life. And I got quite a shock, actually, and quite a fright. And I thought, how the hell are we going to get to Cape Town here? Does this guy know how to fly this thing? And I realized, oopsie, that was an unconscious bias that had been sitting in my head. We were raised to believe that black people should be cleaning the planes, not flying them. So that was a hell of a shock. And as a result, I've never been able to say again, I don't have any racial bias, because I don't know what else is lurking there, in the deep, dark recesses of my mind. So that was just a typical example of conscious bias that sits there and comes out when you least expect it, and you get a fright and you say, then the idea is, okay, how do I overcome that? Then you have to go and educate yourself, and you have to try and find out more, start to believe, okay, the world is changing. We now have black pilots, and accepting that and respecting it and moving on. So it's no good if you identify your biases, but you do nothing to change them, because then you haven't made much progress. So it's really about understanding and overcoming unconscious biases in the world.
Mm. And I think it's like two levels of understanding. One is to understand that there is this concept of racial bias, because I think you were able to acknowledge it and very quickly, because of your work that you're aware of it and you could hear it as you said it to yourself. It's like,
Yes.
oh, that is one. Whereas I think a lot of people say they make those comments and they're not even aware that it comes from a bias. And then the next step is to identify what that bias is and counter it.
So
Yeah,
that is where, so that is where racial healing comes into the picture, is become increasingly aware of race and racism and the impact that it has, not only on you, but on the people around you. Because you might be committing all kinds of microaggressions, you call it microaggressions, all the time without even realizing it. And for example, when people say, white person might say, to a black person, I'm not a racist at all, I don't see color, I'm colorblind. As far as I'm concerned, I just see humans, I don't see color. Now, that would come from a fairly good intention, people wanting to say the right thing, and it would come from the Book of Rules, but the Book of Rules is a tricky place. And the black person would listen to that and say, how can you not see my color? Because my color has determined my entire life. And now you're telling me you don't even see it? And that's not right. So you're disrespecting my life experience right now. So please, I would appreciate it if you say, I do see color, and I will have to deal with that, rather than trying to deflect it and say, that's called non-racialism, where you try to deflect it and deny it and just pretend it's not there. But that's not going to sort of take us anywhere in this journey. We have to be aware, we have to be bold and courageous and say, right, I do see your color, and I'd like to know more about you, and I'd like to learn about your life experiences. I'd like to know the way you were raised, and because I've been hidden from that all my life, deliberately so. I've been hidden from the realities of our country. So let's do this, let's talk about it, and then break down the divides that have polarized us.
Yeah, because I think we're actually in some ways a victim of this, the way society is structured, and some of us, the way we're victims has advantages.
Yes.
But we're still born into the system and need to become aware of it in order to improve it, to change it. So
right. So there is definitely and that's an important point, Telana, is that there's definitely victimhood on both sides here. Okay, the one is more obvious, because you would imagine that the victims have all been the people that have been oppressed, right, and disadvantaged. But there's also victim mentality on the superior side, because just the mere belief that you are superior is in itself very damaging, because it means you don't respect other people the way you should be. So when you are dealing with them, if you come across with a superior attitude, you're causing more damage than anything else. So you have to heal yourself as well. You have to say, I'm not superior, I'm just different. I'm just different, and I accept and respect other people who are different to me. I'm willing to learn, I'm open to change, all of that stuff, and drop the whole superiority thing, because that's the killer. That's the damaging part. So everybody can benefit from racial healing from both sides of the spectrum, and of course all the other people of color in between. So it's not black or white anymore. It's black and white, and of course also everybody in between. So you have Indian people and you have colored people also suffering from different levels of this. So you call it the human value chain. So the old concept of superiority and inferiority is based on the human value chain, which some people have described as, okay, this is the top of the chain, and that's European, for example, and then it goes down at different levels. And the lower you go, obviously, the more disadvantaged you are and the more inferior you are. So it comes all the way back from colonial days, that stuff, where people arrived with a very supremacy type attitude. in the belief that the locals were definitely inferior. And they weren't really interested in proving that they were inferior. They just wanted to know why they were inferior. And so that thing has persisted. And if you look at Black consciousness, for example, Steve Biko's work, which I believe every South African should be aware of, because it really explains what, the 300 years of systemic racism. If you keep telling people that they are inferior, then you will believe that, will start to believe it yourself. And that's really where the damage starts. One of the women in one of our workshops, racial healing circles, we call them, she was explaining that her parents were so manipulated by the system and the propaganda of superiority and inferiority that they truly believed they were inferior. And they told her that. She grew up learning from her parents about her inferiority and being told that she'll never be able to compete at the same level. She must just accept her fate. And now she's sitting in a managerial role and still struggles to deal with this.
Yeah. Sure, it's so ingrained. So I really appreciate your work, because as when I met you, we said this topic is so important to have these types of courageous conversations. I just want to touch on one more definition, because you've explained a few of the terms: racism, culture, diversity and inclusion, non-racialism, and then the one you mentioned was anti-racism. So maybe just to clarify what that is, so that we have a sense of what some of the terminology is. Yeah.
Okay, so anti-racism is really, understanding and being aware of race and racism, so that when it actually occurs, you will stand up to it. Okay, it doesn't mean you have to get violent or aggressive or anything like that, but it says that you will call it out when you hear it. And that's sometimes quite difficult, because you might be in a circle of friends and your own friends are being racist. And then now you have to tell them that what they just said was unacceptable. Please refrain from doing that in the future, which means that you might lose a few friends along the way. But still, it's really about taking action, learning, making it your business to go out and understand, making it your business to interact with people of a different race, so that you can begin to know where the problems lie and how to solve them. So it's really just being proactive about race rather than reactive. Some people see it as quite a sort of threatening thing, anti-racism, but it's not, in my view, at all. It's just about being proactive and trying to help people understand the importance of healing. Okay, because that's what it is. It's healing. It's not further dividing people. It's trying to bring them together. That's the whole purpose of the exercise, and that's why we call it racial healing, is to break down the barriers. And the only way you can do that is to educate yourself firstly about the history of this country, uh, from all sides. Even I know many Black people that aren't even aware of some of the apartheid laws and what they did, the detail and the extent of them all. So everybody needs to make themselves aware. They need to understand their own racial identity, and then go out with the view to try to repair it. It's like making yourself whole again, basically. That's what racial healing is. And it always starts with you. This is about your own healing. It's not, you're not trying to heal other people. When you're trying to heal other people, that doesn't work. It's like going to someone and saying, listen, from tomorrow, I want you to change because I don't like the way you behave. Well, then you've got a fat chance of getting anywhere with that. So if you say, listen, I've now learned and I understand my own need for change. And as a result of that, I'd like to talk to you, and hopefully I can influence you to start thinking about things in the same way. And one of the concepts, one of the quotations that I'd like to use is that the greatest gift that we can give to a future South Africa is our own healing.
Yeah.
So our children and their children will benefit from our healing, so that when their time comes, hopefully things will be as polarized and divided as they are at the moment.
And I think that that leads straight into how do we have these courageous conversations around this healing? Because I think one of the parts of these healing conversations is the emotions. It's emotions are going to come up. They're part of this. So I wanted to touch base on that, and unless you think there's another way we should start, but I just how do you understand the emotions that are involved in having these courageous conversations?
So we must acknowledge that right up front, when people know they're coming into a racial healing circle, that there's going to be a certain level of discomfort right from the beginning. They're going to be uncomfortable. So it's really critical that we try and create what we call a place of safety, right? And just get everyone to feel that this is not there. You know, racial healing is not about blame and accusation and trying to make people ashamed or feel guilty. That's got nothing to do with it whatsoever. So we try and lay a platform where there is a place of safety and say, listen, we're not here to harm you. We're here to heal, not to harm. Never to harm. Because if you go in without doing that sort of ground rules type thing and creating that place of safety, it's going to be very difficult to get people to buy in. You'll start getting people shutting down before you even know it, right from the word go. So we spend quite a bit of time on just getting people to feel comfortable. And then after that, we ask everybody in the first session, because there are three modules to this in the normal workshop, sometimes four, but at the moment we use mainly three. And they then are asked, and they come in prepared to tell their story of what it was like to grow up in South Africa. And if you have been successful in creating that place of safety, then slowly but surely people will be comfortable enough to be honest and open. And then as the time goes through, we work in different areas. We teach people about the paradigms and about the bias. We get them to interact with each other, to identify their own blockers, we call them blockers, and biases. So there's a lot of interaction, plus a little bit of guidance from us. We give people some of the history lessons without going, again, too hard and not making people feel too uncomfortable. But we give a lot of examples of the history, for example, the Bantu Education Act and the massive damage that that did to the whole country, all the way back from 1953, which was incidentally the year that I was born, is when they started that. And things like the Group Areas Act and the Native Land Act, what that did to this country. So again, we do it not with a view to make people feel ashamed or guilty, although that is sometimes the result, but certainly not the purpose. And just to get them to understand, wow, there was a law that said that South Africa should only be white people. South Africans are white. So black people who lived in South Africa, their citizenship was removed during apartheid. They weren't allowed to be South Africans. They were only allowed to belong to the various homelands. So if you were living in Soweto, for example, and you were born there, but you speak Tswana, you come from a Tswana background and heritage, then your home is Papuda Tswana. You've never been there, you don't even hardly know where it is, but that's yours, that's your country. That's how they created this. No black South Africans. So not many people know that. How sort of devastating that is to people to know that they don't even belong to the country in which they were born. That's just one of, and there are many of those kind of tales. I could go on the whole day here telling you things that will probably make your hair stand. But that's some of the examples. that we use. And again, the healing needs to take place from both sides. It's not just, we want you to feel sorry for Black people. That is not. But we want you to heal your own paradigms that you've been taught, and you were unaware of these things. So hopefully, once you are more aware of them, you'll be able to be open, more open to accepting the need for change. With awareness comes the need for change, and the vulnerability that you need to be able to acknowledge, wow, I didn't know that, and therefore maybe I need to see things a little differently going forward. And then there's a number of exercises and things that we do that will get people to understand each other better. And then at the end of it all, we ask everyone to create their own development plan on how they're going to heal themselves. What are they going to do to become a bit more anti-racist and to heal themselves going forward, so that we can break down these barriers and try and get to a country where there is equal access, for everyone, and there's some sort of a just society where we've eliminated the human hierarchy of value that we were talking about earlier.
Oh, so Hatch Institute really offers a lot of value then in that facilitation, because I think it sounds like me as an individual, I would gain a lot from that safe space that someone who's trained and is working on this themselves, so healing themselves, can provide, and then taking that group, through that journey. So just remind us again then of why that's so important for a business, for an entrepreneur who runs a business, or for corporates, and that to have these healing circles in there as part of their business, because
it's absolutely critical in my view. Obviously, because I'm so passionate about the subject, I will always push this thing. But the reason that we do it is, if we try and give it a bit of a business outcome. And the business outcome is customer service, right? So when I was at Sorbet, for example, we worked very hard. I did all the induction training from day one at Sorbet, and we worked very hard on understanding these issues. Because what happens is, you have a working environment where people are coming in from different backgrounds, different value systems, different life experiences, different everything. They're coming into the workplace, and the only place that they ever get to meet each other really is at work, because they're not mixing socially, with a few exceptions, but largely they don't mix with each other socially. So the workplace is the place where they meet and have the opportunity to heal and to address their issues. And unfortunately, because, as you mentioned earlier on, of the sensitivity and the discomfort around this, a lot of managers of business are too afraid to get involved here, because they don't know what's going to happen. They think it might erupt and cause more damage than it does good. So we need to explain to them that until such time as you have a better understanding of each other's value systems and life experiences, it's very, very difficult to create what we call that sense of belonging for everybody, despite their differences. If you don't feel like you belong, I have never heard anybody walking into a business, or a group of people walking into a business, singing joyfully about the pleasures of making money for the shareholders. I doubt there's a lot of that going on. So it's really, what are we going to do to make people feel that sense of belonging? And we have to make everyone feel that they are accepted, respected, trusted, treated with fairness and dignity. And when you can do all of that effectively, then you can create this common purpose of service, that we all come to work to serve. Because you don't come to work to make money, you come to work to serve. And if we serve well, money will be the reward. Money always follows good service, but service doesn't follow those people who come just to make money. So it's all of that, and then it comes back to the underlying causes of why we don't have a sense of belonging. And that's often to do with race and the different perspectives that people come into the workplace with. So that's why it's so important to break down those divides and create that sense of belonging for each and every individual, regardless of what they look like, how they speak, what accent they use. I mean, all of the different areas of diversity, and that they feel included. Diversity, it's like being invited to the party, but inclusion is being asked to dance. There's a difference there.
Yes.
There's a big difference. So often we put people into positions in the organization because of the numbers that we need to create, and it's a lot driven by government and stuff. Not always, doesn't come from the heart, unfortunately. Not enough of these type of Black economic empowerment initiatives are implemented because they believe it's the right thing to do. They do it because there's pressure on them to do it, and that's unfortunate. But there are some companies, I must say, that do have their hearts in the right place, understand what needs to be done. But there are also many that haven't quite grasped that yet. So if you don't have that, if you don't do it for the right reasons, it becomes very transparent. And then people say, well, I'm just being promoted because I'm Black and I don't really deserve it. And then this self-doubt and this imposter syndrome starts to take over, and of course affects performance. And then people say, or managers will say, this person's got a bad work ethic. And so I try and remind him that nobody is born with a bad work ethic. Okay?
Yeah.
Circumstances provide you with bad work ethics. And if you're not treated properly, you will not put your full weight behind your work and your purpose. And then you will be perceived as having a bad work ethic. But the real problem is the culture hasn't created the environment. It's not conducive to people feeling comfortable and going out and doing their best work.
Gosh, brings us back to the cultureneering.
Yes.
And I know part of what you talk about is a new, well, I don't know if it's new, but a type of leadership. And because I think what you're mentioning there is to make these kind of changes, the leaders in our businesses, because that's where, as you say, the business is the one place where we all come together. Mm-hmm. So we really need the people leading us to start to come from that place of heart and have these conversations. Is anything you want to say about the leadership?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, absolutely, because it all comes from the leadership. So the two elements of that. There's the personal development of the leadership. So that's getting people to understand their own biases, their own blockers, helping them to sort of overcome those blockers, and then to be able to move on to leadership then. Because there's absolutely no point in somebody going out there trying to change people to create a certain culture if you as the leader have not yet demonstrated your own ability to change. You need to you need to show up. There's an ancient some ancient wisdom from a guy called Rumi who said, yesterday I thought I was clever, so I tried to change other people. But now I became wise, so I tried to change myself. And so if you can demonstrate your own ability to transform, to overcome your biases, etc., then you can move on and try and become a leader. So the leadership that we encourage, call it culture-driven leadership, which includes the concept of servant leadership. But the leadership style that we encourage is what we call earning the moral authority to lead. Okay, not the power-based authority. The old traditional style is the higher you are in the structures and the hierarchy of the organization, the more power you have to be able to make people do what you want them to do. This is completely different. It's got nothing to do with power. It's earning the right from the people that you are leading the right to go out there and to build trust and respect for you. Show people that you genuinely care about their well-being, that your health, your psychological health, physical health, financial health. If you really show caring, if you show a commitment to their growth and development, a true commitment, not just a sort of perceived commitment, but a proper commitment to the growth and development, and then also to create that sense of belonging and a common purpose. And finally, the one thing that I think is probably the biggest challenge in all South African companies today, based on all the culture surveys that we do, is have you created a place of safety where people can feel free to speak without fear? And we get the most remarkable results from that, where we would ask the question in an organization, and the leadership would vote, 80% of them would vote, yes, we have created a place of safety. But when we ask the staff, there's about 18% of them agree with that.
Wow.
So there's a massive perception gap. And when we go to the leadership and we say, well, how did you not know this? And they would say, because nobody ever told us. And of course, nobody ever told them because they were too afraid. So, so you get this, people, it's like two ships passing in the night and the blind leading the blind there. And so we really have to, prioritize. If you want any kind of culture in business, you must prioritize that place of safety. People must be able to speak up without being afraid of some kind of retaliation, victimization, or whatever. Because if you don't, then you definitely have a toxic culture. So those are the things that are important to leadership, personal development, and that moral authority to lead.
So if we want to be having more of these conversations, these healing conversations, because I think that brings us back to the courage bit. Leaders need to create that place of safety, and as you say, make it a priority. And I don't think many people know how to do that, but that could probably be another whole podcast episode just about how to create safe spaces. But part of that, I think, is the courage in the leader to do that. But then it's also, I think, the safety allows people's courage to help them to speak up. So, yeah.
That's right. Sorry, I interrupted you.
No, I was going to say, so where's courage fit into all of this?
Okay, well, the leaders have to be courageous first because they have to create that place of safety, right? So what do they do there? It's all about being able to give honest feedback and to elicit honest feedback. So the first thing is to go out there, ask your people how you're doing as a leader in terms of those 5 or 6 things that I mentioned to you earlier on. Have I created all these different things? Ask them straight. If they're afraid to tell you and they won't give you honest answers, well, you've got to do. But if they do tell you, if they are sort of bold enough and courageous enough to tell you, that's how you learn, and that's where you start. So the first thing, like I'm doing a survey at the moment right now, not me, just our team is doing a survey right now of a very senior manager in a very large corporation, right? And that manager was really bold, and he asked all of his exco people that report into him to answer these questions about him, right? And we went and interviewed each one of those people, and they gave some pretty honest feedback. And so he was open to it. They were amazed that he was even allowing such a report to take place, such a survey to take place. And the net result is that he learned a hell of a lot. There was a lot of positivity about him as well, but he learned a lot, and he's open to receiving that feedback and then showing a true commitment to dealing with the issues that have been raised. That's how you start the process. You start to show that you're open, that you don't mind getting good, honest feedback, as long as it's not aggressive, abusive, that kind of stuff. But good, open, honest feedback with a fair degree of compassion and empathy is the power that starts to create that moral authority, and then it grows from there. You know, I will respect you if you respect me. I will trust you if you trust me. Instead of saying I am your boss, you better respect me, or else.
Yes.
Which is the typical way of doing it, the old traditional
Yeah.
way. So all of those things will help to create that moral authority. And there's a lot of things. We have a whole workshop just on that alone that we help leaders with.
But it all starts with that personal development. So developing yourself so that you're open to receive the quality feedback that actually will make a difference.
Yeah. And you have to make yourself vulnerable. That's very important.
Yes.
People don't like to allow others to see their vulnerabilities and their weaknesses. They don't like that at all. So they put up a facade and always try to pretend that they're in control of everything, that they know everything, because they're afraid of what might result if they become open and vulnerable. But it's a mistake to do that. The more vulnerable you are, the more credit you will build and credibility you will create. But when you try and hide your weaknesses and flaws, is when people start to lose faith in you, trust and stuff like that. So it's quite a challenge. It's a big paradigm shift for many leaders, particularly for men. That sort of cowboys don't cry kind of thing. They don't like anything that might expose a flaw or a weakness. So they do everything in their power to hide it. But it's sometimes you can see through it, and that's when people start to lose respect. So it's just being open, being honest, being willing to receive feedback that will help you become a better leader, rather than we say to them, the little trick always is, when people are giving you feedback, listen with the intention of learning and understanding, not with the intention of denying and defending. Because when you do that, then you're not learning. Every opportunity you get, you should listen to learn. Because sometimes we think we know everything already, and then we don't listen, or we interrupt people. And that's very disrespectful.
Yeah.
To interrupt people. So just, every time you interrupt somebody is not only disrespectful, but you also have just wasted a learning opportunity because you didn't want to listen. So, all of these things are part of the personal development of leaders.
Yeah. So I just want to check, I don't know if there's anything else in terms of that corporate business, entrepreneur, that's the work kind of atmosphere, because I'm also quite interested in if we just touch a bit on in our personal lives. Like you're saying, if I'm endeavoring, which I do try and endeavor to be anti-racist, so to speak up, and I'm very aware that I have so many biases and I'm on this massive learning curve. But like, how do we at the braai with the friends on the weekend, or with the family around the dinner table, got Christmas coming up, there's always family there, and that. So I don't know if there's any tips or anything, because I think partly it's us in our humbleness and our understanding that we need to learn and be aware of what we say.
Yeah.
And also, I think we also have to have compassion for others that are so stuck in their biases and they don't understand. But also, how do we? It's a very fine, like there's a dance there. So I don't know if you've got any tips or anything that will help me over this next holiday period going forward.
It is very, very challenging. It's not an easy thing to do, and so one has to do it with a certain element of caring and compassion. Don't make people feel bad about it or ashamed or guilty. So generally, if somebody makes a racist comment or tells a racist joke, I would say, I would really prefer it if you didn't make those kind of comments in public like this. I get uncomfortable about it. No harm done, but please just bear this in mind for the future. I'm not going to make a big fuss about it, but I'd like to just remind you that that kind of talk, is not helping our country go forward. Something like that. Not easy, still not easy to do, but it's better than saying, shut up, how dare you say things like that?
Yes.
Because that's not going to go down well. Yeah, so I don't know if you know that we are starting, I'm busy working on it right now and going to be writing a book, funny enough, starting from Monday on racial healing. And we are starting a racial healing movement in South Africa next year, probably launching around about March, April. We're working on that at the moment. And that will be a really scaled up version of what we're doing at the moment, but with a lot more activities about racial healing. So obviously the racial healing circles, the personal development, one-on-one racial healing, online racial healing, and then events like theatre, promoting racial healing, music, festivals, a national sort of racial healing day once a year where everybody gets an opportunity to do something positive
Wow.
racial healing, and many other things that we are trying to put together for next year. So anyone who's interested in that, I would really appreciate the support. And anyone who wants to get involved in training and facilitating these things, we'd also be very happy to hear from them.
So how can people get hold of you then, or follow you if they want to know about that? So what's your...
So they can either contact me on LinkedIn, or they can email info@hatchinstitute.co.za. info@hatchinstitute, one word, .co.za.
Great, and I'll have links to your website and all of that in the show notes.
Yes.
Super. So as part of Let's Talk Courageous Conversations, I always like to ask my guests this question about, on a more of a personal note, like, when was the last time that you had a crucial conversation, a conversation that really counted for you, that required your courage to have it? You can share as much as you want to about the context and that, but we're really just interested to hear, when was the last one you had, that you can think of, and what helped you have that conversation?
Right. So I have a fair number of these conversations because I do a lot of one-on-one coaching with leaders and executives. And so I have them on a fairly regular basis. And some people who are a little bit more skeptical, and cynical about the work, it does need to be a fairly open and strong conversation. Again, with understanding and compassion, and not with the idea of making people feel ashamed or guilty. So yes, I have them fairly often, these things. Sometimes they go down better than other times. Sometimes not terribly successful, but it's not about changing everybody. It's about getting people to realize their own need for change. And so if I can just do that one person at a time, and try and influence someone to have a good hard look at themselves and say, up until now, I've been wanting to change everyone else, but I have discovered the enemy, and he is me. And so I try and get that, and each one is a little win. I know it sounds crazy, but we can't change a country overnight. Obviously, it's just ridiculous thought. But if we're changing one person at a time, and we do enough of that, then slowly but surely you'll start a movement where people start to recognize the need for change, and to create a strong society of equality and respect. And at the end of the day, that's all that we can try and do.
So it sounds like that higher purpose, that higher intention that you have helps you to show up and have these conversations. Is there
Yes,
anything else that?
It's,
So
I suppose it's just a passion. People say to me, but you got to get the timing right for this. And I always then quote Martin Luther King, who said that it's always the right time to do the right thing. And so we just have to do what we have to do now. Because if we don't, our children and their children will be discussing the same thing in the years ahead. So if we can start doing this now, break down the barriers, earn the trust and respect of people who are different to us, and show them trust and respect in return, then maybe our children will be able to live in a different society, at least partially. It takes time, these things, but someone's got to do it, and we can't wait anymore. There's too much waiting going on here. We're not proactive enough as a society. We just allow things to happen to us. We just get used to. People say that we are very resilient. That's the very popular word at the moment. We are resilient. We know how to adjust to no electricity. In Santon right now, we've had 3 days of no water. And we're really resilient. We can handle that stuff. We learn how to deal with that. And I'm saying that's rubbish. Why should we be resilient? We should stand up and not allow these things to happen in the first place. Never mind become adjusted to what we are served up. That is not the answer to our future. We need to be more proactive.
very much, yeah. So I don't know if that is the answer to the question, is having those proactive conversations, and as you said, it's but I always ask, what is a conversation that you believe we need to be having more of today that would make the world a better place? Is there anything else to add besides what because you've already outlined some very crucial conversations?
Yeah, I think I think there are two things, two underlying areas that people need to address. One is educate yourself. Become more educated about what we are dealing with here. And the other one is interact more with people who are different to you. Those are the two things you can do to be proactive and to become anti-racist as well.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Well, thank you very much, Ian. Unless there's any other thing that we haven't touched on that you want to share?
No, the preamble of the Constitution also talks about healing and creating a just society united in our diversity. So we need to listen to the Constitution as well. It's there literally in black and white. And so we must follow that too.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you very much, Ian. You've given me, and I'm hoping people listening, a lot of food for thought and a place to start in our own education and proactive conversations. So
it's a pleasure, Telana. Thank you very much for having me. Appreciate it.
I'm Telana, and this has been Let's Talk Courageous Communication. Please get in touch and let us know how you are finding having more of these healing conversations as you muster your courage and apply what we've learned today from Ian into your workplace and into your family and friends situation. Do get in touch. You can email me at hello@innercoaching.co.za. And also please find us and follow us on your favorite podcast app, as well as on YouTube. And while you're there, give us a rating. It does help us, more people find us and follow, and hopefully we can all just then learn to have more courageous conversations and change our worlds just one conversation at a time. Thank you for listening.